Hello, my love. Welcome to another episode of Blisstopia podcast. I'm your host, Mercedes Castellani, and I'm super happy to be recording this episode. Today, we're going to talk about discipline and sticking to healthy habits, even when it's hard. Our guest today is Mark Klevinas. Mark Klevinas is North America Sales Director at Tenute del Mondo Wine Group. He's also a canoe kayak athlete and yoga teacher. During his career as an athlete, he represented Canada on the world stage on the 2007 Pan American Games, 2013 World Championships, and 2008, 2009, 2013 World Cups. That's a lot of achievements right there. Mark and I met in my previous life when I was working in the coaching industry. So I was the global marketing director. Mark was the North America sales director. And when he joined the company, we very naturally clicked because he just finished his yoga teacher training in Bali. And I was going to Bali for a yoga and meditation retreat. And I've always admired how Mark was super, super disciplined, even on business trips. So I think today we're going to have a beautiful conversation for you to be inspired into sticking into healthy habits, even when it's hard. So welcome, Mark, to the show.
Thanks, Mercedes. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Amazing. So let's start by the very beginning. Tell us a little bit more about your career as an athlete.
Yeah, I guess I'll start way at the beginning. As a kid, I picked up everything. So I was pretty natural with conventional sports, be it hockey, lacrosse, basketball, volleyball, these kinds of team sports that you might get into a little earlier on. I never got into soccer, football, anything like that. But when I was 7, we met a family with a long time history in canoe kayak, which is a bit of an obscure sport. And it's an Olympic level sport that dates back to probably one of the early days of the Olympics. We started going down to the canoe club in the summers. And in the summers, it was basically like having a cottage. We lived in a rural town just outside of the city of Toronto, and there was a 16-mile creek that fed into Lake Ontario, and it was super calm. And there's the Burloak Canoe Club that sits there on city property. And so we just started going down to the club. It was cheap daycare, to be honest, for our parents. It's a pretty inexpensive way to get outside and spend half the day in a pretty safe environment. It was something I really typically just did in the summers. When you're 14 or 15, you specialize in either canoe or kayak. When you start in the sport, you do a bit of everything if you do start that young. And about 14, 15 is when you start to take it a little bit more seriously. You might do morning training and evening training before and after school. I didn't, to be honest. I stayed playing other sports. So I was a later development athlete in this sport. My first tour was when I was an under 23 athlete. So as a junior, I was more of a club level athlete, and I would compete in the summers in crew boats and things like that. And I always liked working as a team. And then in the winter, I'd play basketball and volleyball and some of the other sports that I was interested in. And then when I went to university, I went to Carleton University, and it was about 1.5 kilometers or a mile from the Rideau Canoe Club. And the Rideau Canoe Club happened. It was a great, it's still a great paddling club, but at the time had a portion of the men's canoe national team training out of there. And our sport, what I loved about the community of our sport was you would rub shoulders with former Olympic champions, former Olympic medalists, and generations of Olympians through the sport just by showing up at the club. So for me, it was always possible. There was always an example there to follow. And generally when you're on the water, that's how you would learn as a kid. You'd watch a really fast group go by and you'd just try to copy, and then eventually that translated into video and other things. But it was super inspiring in that way. And having the opportunity to live close to athletes that were not only on their way on this trajectory, but some that were already there. It was just good company to be in. So we were, you follow along. So just like you learn when you're a kid, when groups are passing, you're now a little bit more part of that group, and you just try to keep up. So it can be a bit harsh sometimes because you can be left behind in cold water, but you always just try to get back with the group as quickly as you can and try to keep up. It was through those mediums, through different types of cross training. Our sport was built on volume. We would train 15 times a week. There would be 2 sessions on the water every Monday, every Tuesday, every Thursday, every Friday. And then on Wednesdays and Saturdays, we had 1 longer session. And then we filtered in running and weights throughout the week to build in a baseline. So this was something that just created, I think, everyday healthy habits. And as an athlete at that time, I was 17, living away from home. working at a sports bar in the evenings to try to keep rent coming in, and also trying to figure out school and a training schedule. So you learn to juggle multiple things at a time, and you're not always making the best decisions for yourself, especially at that time of your life. But you really do develop this innate ability to just do it, to just get up and do the things that are most important in a day first, and then kind of take the secondary tasks on. I never really liked racing singles. That wasn't something that was, still don't, if I were to race again. But I like training, and that's something that I developed later in my career. I would have been a lazy athlete, quote unquote, in that first part as a junior athlete, because I wasn't showing up to winter training, and I wasn't doing the extra runs, and I wasn't doing all that stuff. But I would show up on the water and paddle with friends and enjoy that aspect of it. But in terms of a sport like this, it doesn't matter how talented you are. If you're not doing the extra work, if you're not doing the behind the scenes stuff by yourself, you ultimately won't be successful, and you won't be able to contribute to that team the way you'd want to if you're not at a certain level as an individual. So, that I was able to get my first opportunity to race internationally in 2007, and that was when I competed at the Pan American Games. I ended up fourth in the C2000 meters and sixth in the C2400 meters. We were an under 23 team. We were a development team, but we were racing against seniors. I believe the crew that won that year was from Brazil, and they were in the World Championships final, and I think they may have medaled. And the crew that was second was also in the final, and they were from Mexico. So we were in good company, and that was the first step to kind of understanding what that next level looked like. And then the following year, we were able to secure a spot in 2008, which was an Olympic year on the World Cup season. We were able to win one of the events at our national team trials in doubles. So that's what I always raced overseas. And then we were able to race at a bit of a higher level with the senior team again on the World Cup circuit, and understand, what that next level looks like. You thought you were fast off the line, and really the race starts at halfway at that level. So if you're in pain there and you're struggling, you're kind of toast. So you've got to really understand that there is another gear that you have to get to. And I wouldn't say that I ultimately got there, but you certainly start to understand that and start to put the training forth in order to do that. And then 2009, we were in the same spot, securing on the World Cup circuit, and we were able to go race again in Germany and Hungary. Most of our trips were to Eastern Europe, so we'd race in Czech Republic, Germany, and Hungary quite a bit, just as mainstays for our sport. It's an Eastern European driven sport, and in Hungary it is their national sport. So there's a lot more of it, and there's a lot more depth in that part of the world. And then I took some time off. For me, I always had to work. I would have struggled with resources at the time, and it was just at a tipping point financially where I just needed to spend more time, earning an income. So there was actually the family that had gotten me into the sport. One of her name's Connie Lee Olisha. Her sister Cindy owned a clothing agency, and I started working there part-time and just helping them with sales. So what we now do for wine on an agency purpose, I did for fashion. And since she was part of the paddling community to some degree, they understood that, I had other interests and I wanted to do other things. So, I worked there pretty diligently for a good year full time. And then I started selling a couple labels and being successful with it. And I negotiated kind of a hybrid opportunity, in 2009, where I really just came in for meetings. So I'd book everything on the phone at home, and I'd come in to show the lines in person, and then I'd go off and train or do whatever I needed to do to maintain my schedule. So it really was a natural way for me to incorporate, a full-time job and more of a career, and also a training schedule. Through my working world, eventually, I knew I needed to create a little bit more time to train. And even though I actually loved the fashion agency world, and it was a lovely job to have, and it worked for my lifestyle, it just didn't fit completely, and I was still missing out on some of that higher level training. So I applied for a job to be the head coach of Team British Columbia. So I ended up getting that job and going over and leading the province. So I led them for about 2 years. And for me, that was just a more natural fit to what I was already trying to do. So I was coaching and training, and a lot of the times those kind of fit together. Men's canoe singles is very comparable to like a developmental kayaker, or women in kayak are typically, if you're at the same kind of racing level, you'd be about the same speed as a men's canoe. Just we paddle on one side and kayakers paddle on two sides, and that's just kind of the way it shakes out. But I was able to go to Vancouver and travel the province of British Columbia, again, find more community, more training medium, and also be a bit of a leader in that space in terms of bringing some of the disciplines that we had from some of the clubs in Ontario to the West Coast, and just being a bit of a bridge for those athletes to bring some of that, not only technique, but baseline of training, just level of and capacity and just regimen that you would get from a top level athlete. And my coach as a kid predominantly coached from his boat. You'll see a lot of coaches in motorboats. So I would only coach in a motorboat if I was doing video or we were running a time control, or there was some instance where I couldn't be on the water. And then, with that, sometimes I would be training before because there was a serious practice that I needed to do. And then I would go on the water again with the kids and just play around.
Whoa.
You're still developing a base, a feel for the boat, and, all those kinds of things. It was at that time where I actually was able to put myself back on the World Cup circuit team in 2013. And then I made the World Championships for the first time in a 4-man canoe in a 4-boat. And then after that, we had some changes within the distances that we raced at the Olympics. So we raced, when I was a kid growing up, 1,000 meters and 500 meters as our predominant distance. And then in 2012, they introduced the 200 meter and they took out the 500 meter. So things changed as the way that we qualified and as to the way that you might specialize and start to train for these certain distances. And I ended up, the way that it shook out in Canada, I saw my best opportunity as doing C1 200, which was something that certainly didn't resonate with me. It was singles and 200 meter, much shorter distance, and a much more powerful speed-driven race. And I would say I did an okay job at that, but it was a natural kind of transition out. After the World Championships, I moved back to Toronto. I wanted to train with actually an athlete that had just won an Olympic medal, a bronze medalist from London, and spend my time doing that. I thought that was the best way for me to be successful as an athlete again, was to, have more access to that higher level training and company. So I did that, and that's how I found Wine Sales. There was a friend that I had met a decade prior, and he and I became fast friends, and he was from the clothing business previously, and he had owned a wine agency in the province for about 20 years at that point. So he had a small agency, and again, I had the opportunity to sell purely on commission, so I could make my schedule. So I trained around it for a few years. And then when I was ready to stop paddling, I had a job, which was really nice to invest my time fully in. And then a few years later, a big corporation bought us, and I kind of started moving through the US. And that's where you'd find me.
What it's really interesting is what you said in the beginning. You had these people around your corner who were already medalists, who were already champions. So you had all of these expanders around you who showed you that it was so possible, so accessible. There's a lot of work you need to put in, but if you really want this, it's so possible to get it. And it's so
Really
beautiful that you had all of these people really close to you, showing you with their example, with their lives, that if you actually wanted those medals, you could totally go and get them. So
100%.
you were very lucky to have them so early.
Today.
So you had a very, very early start as an athlete. You achieved amazing things in the world stage. And then in these more recent years, you transitioned more into yoga. So how did that interest come up? Where did the interest for yoga come up, and what motivated you to do a yoga teacher training, which is also a very serious commitment? It's not just doing a couple of classes a week. It's a very serious commitment. Where did the motivation for all of that come from?
Yeah, yoga, people tried to get me into yoga throughout my life, much like probably many people that are in yoga now. It takes a few pushes to make it stick. But when I was an athlete, actually, one of the first companies I applied for sponsorship for was Lululemon. And at the time, they were not as popular as they are today. And somebody wrote me back and they started sending me clothing, to be honest. And I started reviewing those clothes the best that I could with the little knowledge that I had with training and all those other things. And then they just kind of kept doing it. So every now and again, I'd be able to do that. So I had some sort of connection into what that commercial yoga world would have looked like, I guess, at the time. I ended up working for them where they offer free yoga classes and other community training mediums throughout wherever they're located. And I did yoga maybe a few times there, but it was very once a month or maybe once every 6 months, I would drop into a class and just go, oh, that was nice, and then walk away from it. But it wasn't until really my wife and I moved to Florida, and we started using it as a way to kind of chill together. We haven't actually had a TV since then, but at the time we moved into this house with this huge unit area where there was nothing to put but a TV. And a friend of ours had been getting rid of one, so we took theirs. And after, I don't know, maybe a month or two, I realized we'd been sitting on the couch a lot. We'd been watching TV. We'd been vegging after work. It's a very natural thing to do. But instead, I thought, there was some apps coming out with great yoga content, and we had been practicing a little bit together before we had moved down. And we just found a teacher on the Alamoves platform that we had resonated with. Her name's Bryony Smith, and we just started doing classes. So in the evening, instead of watching TV, we would throw on a yin class and light some candles, and then maybe order some dinner or cook food together after. And it was just a nice way for us to connect and kind of move or recover from the day and just feel a little bit better before bed. And then really what elevated this even further, because we were still doing all of our other training mediums, and yoga was really a supplemental thing at that point for recovery, was COVID. We had started to split our time between Miami and Toronto. I had accepted a role back in Toronto to lead a team there, and my wife had a condo there, a small condo just near the office. So we decided to kind of gut it and renovate it, and the world shut down. So we had no furniture. We threw a bed in there. I ran to the nearest Lululemon at the time, and I bought 2 yoga mats, and we worked out on yoga mats for months. And that became our daily medium of exercise. Toronto as a city really shut down in 2020. And, there were no gyms. It was freezing cold. So that was it. I'd walk the dog and go for the occasional run, but it was yoga. And so the hours on the mat kind of started adding up. And at that point, online yoga teacher training became a thing as well. So Bryony Smith, who was the teacher that we both resonated with, we both decided to do her 200-hour yoga teacher training that she was offering on her Align platform. And we just gobbled it up. So there was, some traditional reading in there, and also some breath work and mantra, and a ton of great information. It's something that I would suggest anybody who's doing yoga, even if you don't want to be a teacher, a 200-hour training just as a baseline to understand, your body, a bit of the nervous system, how your breath works, and how it all kind of integrates and works together. It would certainly be my recommendation. It is a lot to bite off, but there are a lot of courses that are stretched over 6 months or a year, and you can kind of complete at your own pace. And it's just a lot of good information that really just they provide you for you to learn about yourself. So whether you do that in person or via an online medium, because maybe that's a safer way for you to do it, I'd highly suggest it. And then from there, it just, the flame was lit. I just started gobbling up as much information as I could. And I'd still consider myself very young in this space, only having practiced quite seriously for about 4 to 5 years. And I found Ashtanga for the first time when I went to Bali for my 300-hour teacher training to complete my 500 level. And that was a practice that resonated with me quite quickly.
And what made you choose Ashtanga over other types of yoga? And for women who maybe never heard about Ashtanga, what's the difference between Ashtanga yoga and other kinds of yoga? And why did you choose this one?
So it was a style that was developed by T. Krishnamacharya and Sri Patabi Joyce, and it was popularized in the 50s and then in the US in the 70s. But Asta literally means 8, and Anga or Anga literally means limbs or body part. So it's the 8 limbs of yoga. It's Yama, Nayama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi, all tied into this one holistic system. So there are 6 series. It starts with the primary series, which is roughly 72 postures, and you go through about 50 some odd vinyasas, and then you'd advance there to the intermediate series, and then there are 4 advanced series, so A, B, C, and D. What happens here, the student progresses at their own pace, and what I love about it is really that holistic system built on the foundation of the primary series. If you can practice the primary series with extreme competence, you can be sure you can translate that to other aspects of your life and also other aspects of yoga and other mediums of practice. But The practice itself begins with 5 rounds of Surya Namaskara A and 5 rounds of Surya Namaskara B, and that never changes. In addition to that, the standing sequence, which is a set number of postures, also never changes, and also the finishing sequence never changes as well. What changes when you move through advanced intermediate series would be that middle, that seated sequence that comes in the primary series. You practice this 6 days a week, and it runs on the moon calendar. So on a new moon or a full moon, you take that extra day off and you take a day of rest, which I love because, again, it helps keep everything in balance, and it ultimately creates that discipline and that foundation. The primary series is the base of your practice. It's something that you always come back to. So it doesn't matter what series you're practicing. If you're in some of these advanced levels, there might be one time a week where you're always going to practice primary series. Typically, it's taught Mysore style, which is something that is fundamental to this practice, which would be 5 days a week where there is a teacher and there might even be an assistant in a room where they're moving through the practice with you at your pace. So everybody shows up in a room anytime they want within that 2-hour window. And typically there would be availability before that as well, where you can move through whatever series that you're working on. And you might be working on this specifically with the teachers in the room and at your own pace, as long as you finish by the end of the window. So for me, where this is super efficient and productive is the sense that you've got somebody working on your practice with you every time you show up in that room. So even if you're a new student, if you're walking into a Mysore room, the teacher will more than likely greet you. They'll ask you a little bit of history of your practice. They'll ask you whether or not you'd like adjustments, and then they'll allow you they'll welcome you, and you'll be able to come and practice. And they will notice certain aspects of your practice. They'll come over and talk to you, and they'll work through the postures that you're learning as you go. So since the practice is as complicated as it is, it's something that really should be done under a proper guide. And as you are working through the practice, you would add in a new posture each week as you're kind of developing. And when you've established the primary series, you would want to practice that for the minimum of a year before you'd move on or introduce other series or practice. It's a very rigorous practice, and it focuses on a couple things that help also keep things in line. And one is the drishti, so that focal point. And the other is the breath. So they use ujjayi breath all the way through, and also with a count. And then the last would be the bandhas. So mula bandha, jalandhara bandha, and uddiyana bandha are the root lock, the stomach lock, and also the throat lock. And they'll help create a lift and also different energy within your body. And then in terms of stylistic differences between Ashtanga and other mediums, so it would originally have been called Vinyasa Ashtanga, so it's very much rooted in Vinyasa. The difference for Vinyasa would be that it doesn't follow a set sequence, so it's wherever the teacher wants to take you. It has a Vinyasa foundation that's kind of like your rinse, your cleaning, but they can move to any posture at any time, whereas Ashtanga is a set count of breath and a set sequence, no matter what. It's often referred to as a little bit more of a rigorous or athletic version of Hatha. Hatha is a base yoga of most practices.
Amazing. So you had this incredible career as an athlete. Then you move into the most rigorous type of yoga that we can find out there. It's very intense physically. It's very intense mentally. You need to practice 6 times a week. So you are someone who really embodies discipline and sticking even when it's hard. And even when we were colleagues, I remember during business trips, always we had dinners with the whole team. Everybody would go to bed like super, super late, lots of food, lots of amazing, delicious wines. And I would literally wake up the next day and I would feel so bad. I was like, oh my God, I can never work today. Mark, on the other hand, would wake up at 5 a.m., practice Ashtanga yoga, and they show up at 8 a.m. ready to work for another day as if nothing happened. And I literally always admired this because I was like, how is he able to go to bed so late, wake up at 5 a.m., do his yoga practice, and then show up to work as if nothing ever happened? So how do you stick to healthy habits? I mean, you're a national sales director now. How do you stick to your practice even when it's hard, when you're traveling, when you have a super busy schedule with important meetings, when it's just not convenient maybe to keep your practice? So how do you stick to your healthy habits when it's hard?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing is finding something that you're committed to. But I would also say that you're the most important thing that you should be committed to. So taking care of yourself should be the number one priority. It's easier if you can make it accessible. One of the things I like about yoga in general and certainly about Ashtanga Ashtanga is once you know the practice, you don't really need anything else. So it's helpful to go to a teacher and it's helpful to follow along, but you can follow the schedule. I have a teacher that I work with here that believes in not using a mat. So feeling different surfaces and getting to understand that nuance. So I started traveling without a mat, and that cuts down on things that I have to bring along. You just have to, in my eyes, remove certain barriers and make things as accessible as possible. So not only in your everyday life, but in your traveling life is that routine and keeping things as even keeled and as balanced as possible. And you would have noticed I would never have been the latest person out, but certainly, in our industry, there's a lot of wine and food, prioritizing sleep in general. So that, if you're going to do 3 things that you could do while you're traveling or busy, it's prioritizing diet, sleep, and water. These are things that you need to survive. And then when you can, it's regular exercise. So as I mentioned, in terms of accessibility, I try to live in places where you can just walk outside and go for a walk or a run, and it's not completely miserable. But not everybody can do that. So, but I would maintain that everybody has a floor, and hopefully you can find some warmth, and you can use it to sit and meditate and use your breath and use the tools that are always available to you. A moment of calm costs nothing, and it does a remarkable amount for your system, for your regulatory. And other things that you can do when you're traveling, walk as much as you can. It's a great way to explore new cities. If we've got a dinner or an event or anything like that that's under 90 minutes away, and I know that's a lot for a lot of people, and if you've got to show up presentable, it might be challenging, but if it's under 90 minutes, I'm probably walking both directions. And if I've been sitting on a plane all day, I just need to move. So that's generally something that I've always adopted, unless it's pouring rain and you're just going to show up and be miserable. The benefit of that exercise and the clarity that you get from that exercise before sitting down to an event, to a work function, things like that, I find invaluable. And then also just prioritizing your morning. I think the day will always get ahead of you, and you can't control so many aspects. So the reason I look refreshed at 8 is because I've really just taken my daily rinse, my literal shower, and then my rinse of Ashtanga or whatever yoga practice I can do at that time. And, I'm feeling probably the best I'm going to feel all day, but I think that that's a good way to start, because you're ultimately probably not going to feel better after that, and there's a lot to setting up your day and your life in a way where you can keep it rather smooth.
And it's really interesting what you said about committing to something, making yourself the most important commitment in your life, and also setting yourself as a priority then, because sometimes what happens is that many people will set their jobs as their priorities or their families as their priorities, something else other than themselves. And then they look at themselves and they're like feeling absolutely miserable because the priority is somewhere else. Whereas if you put yourself as the priority, you start your day right with your discipline, with the things that will make you feel good, and they always work. For me, for example, I know that every time I meditate in the morning, I'm going to feel good. Every time I go for a run in the morning, I'm going to feel good. So it's just doing those things that are going to make you feel good. You make yourself a priority, and then from that space, from that full cup, then you can give to your work, to your partner, to your friends and family, whoever is expecting things from you. But I think it's all about setting yourself as the priority for the day, not let other people dictate your own priorities.
Oh, 100%. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think if you're healthy, there's always going to be work for you. If you're not healthy mentally and physically, everything becomes more challenging. And then if you lose your job, or you're really out, because you've allowed yourself to go a little bit, and then you've also you've got to fix how you earn an income.
Absolutely.
And additionally, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's so important to have our priorities right, and our health, our peace should always be above work, partners, family members, etc. It's not always easy, but I think there's a right way to do things if you want to do them for the long term, right? If you want to run a marathon, if you want to run a sprint, go ahead. Put other things as a priority, and good luck. That's not going to last very long. But if you want to do that in the long run, and you want to do it well, and you want to do that from your highest, best energy, then it's better to set yourself as the priority.
Yeah. 100%.
Absolutely. So, what would you say to the woman, the man who's listening to this show, and they have a hard time sticking to healthy habits? They have a hard time eating healthy, maybe eating lots of sugar, drinking way more alcohol than they would like to. Maybe they can't commit to sports. Maybe they've tried meditation, but they can't really make it stick. What advice would you give to that person?
This may sound like a little bit of a slogan, but I would say you have everything that you need right now to start. There's no point in delaying. You're really just delaying your happiness and your well-being. It will only get harder, so you need to be smarter, a little bit more efficient with how you do things. I would say you need to invest in yourself. Coming back to that, there's no greater reward that you will ever reap, and time is your biggest investment. So you really need to use it wisely. But in terms of habits, they're all hard to stick to. None of these things are easy. It's something that you need to clear as much space for as you can, and I think we've touched on it a few times. It's making sure that you're the priority, so then you can show up for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. And was there a habit that was hard for you? Because in my mind, you have it all figured out. But now let's go into the
I
details
certainly don't.
and let's get.
I
So
certainly don't.
that's what I want to figure out. Was there any habit that was hard for you, even though you're someone who's very used to discipline, etc.? And we've touched on that. Was there anything that was hard for you, and how did you manage to make it actually stick?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always habits that are hard for you along the way. I think if you really look at it, maybe your heart's not there, or there's certain things that are impeding you from that. I think my biggest issue along the way was typically resource driven, so there would be things that would distract me from my true passions potentially, and I think a lot of people are in that position. You don't have endless supply of money and time to do the things that you'd like to do to develop yourself or your community or your business, but there's one thing that won't change is you're responsible for your own destiny. So your choices ultimately create those habits and ultimately create your reality. What motivates me is simply just to feel a little bit better every day. I beat up my body for many, many years as an athlete, and I wasn't the priority. I was just trying to survive it. And I think when you do make yourself a priority, you can start to rise above that a little bit, or just decide kind of what's for you and what's not for you. And that helps you find that pathway to some of those clearer habits. In the yoga world, I remember doing my training. They're very harsh in terms of, you probably have colleagues and friends all the time that go, my mind's racing, I can't get it to stop. And they just plainly say a busy mind is a weak mind. And you kind of look at them and you go, well, that's true because I haven't trained it, right? And there are things that you can control, and it starts, I think, with that breath, where you can start to access some of that inner work. And some of the things that you can do to control the mind is the right exposure, your breath work, the right conduct. So good begets good. What you put out into the world ultimately is going to come back to you. The capability to shift the mind immediately. So you need to be able to focus. And that's what I love about Ashtanga is if your mind's busy, the practice will get you there because it's challenging. You've got to focus at some point or you're just going to lose it. And then a regulated lifestyle and habits, try not to swing in either direction, with what you're doing in terms of food intake or exercise. You don't start bullish to the point where you need 2 weeks off after. It needs to be a habit. So you need to be able to continually make this choice, and you need to be able to continually to want to make that choice. And I think that's the biggest thing is if you look deep down, do you really want it? Because if you did, you would, I think, put that effort forward in order to do that.
Absolutely. And you have moments when, even if you are committed and even if you've decided that you want to do it, there may be some days when you don't feel motivated. You're like, oh my God, like today it's like extra hard. How do you handle those moments? Like what happens through your mind when you, for example, you wake up, you're super tired, you literally don't feel like doing Ashtanga today. What do you tell yourself to commit to that thing that you've decided that you wanted to do?
I've never regretted doing it. So that's one. So I've never regretted going for the run, going for the bike, going for the swim, going for the walk, doing the yoga practice, going for the paddle. Even if I had 2 hours of sleep and I was out drinking the night before because I was trying to keep some sort of a semblance of a balanced life. I always felt better after, and I can always go to sleep later, or I can go to sleep that night and I'll be fine. I had again, it might come off harsh. I had a friend, and it sticks with me to this day. It was probably in 2009. We were living together. who he drove me to practice fairly regularly. And he poked his head in one day after a long night. We were both out the night before, but we committed to getting to practice as we always did. And I just brushed him off. I said, "No, I'm not coming today. I'm sleeping." And he just very plainly said, "We can't all be great," and he walked out. And I'll never forget that. And I'm not trying to be great in any way, but I just, if I can't even get out of bed, if I can't make that effort, then you're right. I deserve what else is coming to me, kind of thing. But life is harsh. It's not easy. It is kind of cutthroat that way, and you really just need to put in the work sometimes when you don't want to.
Yes, and it's very interesting what you said. I never regret it. We always feel good after we do that thing. We always feel good after the meditation, after the run, after the yoga class. So what I do, for what works for me, it's when I don't feel really motivated, I don't think about it. I'm like, okay, this is what I committed to do it. I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to connect with my emotions, see if I feel like it or not. I just put my training shoes and I go for a run, for example. And then when I come back, as you said, like, you will never regret it. You always feel good. It might be a little harsh just to get out to do the thing that you wanted to do, but when you're back, it just feels so good. So after all of these years of yoga and meditation, which changes did you notice in your body, your mind, your soul?
In my body, I would say I've kind of stripped back to what I was as a kid, almost as a teenager. It's a little bit more fluid with how I move, more alignment, more awareness. I wouldn't say I had that mentally as a kid, but if you watch young kids, they're very malleable. They can move very well. They squat perfectly. That life hasn't kind of fucked them up to some degree, and they don't have to repair themselves yet. But certain habits throughout your life make you sacrifice certain alignments and certain things. And even sitting in a chair all day, the way that we work, the way that we drive cars, all these things kind of mess you up. So I saw this time in my future after all these years of paddling where I was abusing my body and probably getting way too little sleep and not eating the right foods just due to my awareness at the time. But I saw this repair state or phase in my life coming. And it really has been effective in the sense where my back's straighter. I've fixed certain aspects of my breathing. I would have considered myself a predominant chest breather over the years before starting yoga, and I'm still kind of working through that in terms of learning how to breathe through my belly, pelvic floor awareness, and hip alignment, which drives a lot of the body. I think I'm just becoming a little bit more aware and more efficient and just smarter as to how I use my leverage. And it's not perfect, and it's certainly a phase that I've worked through. In terms of mentally, I would say there's more clarity, there's less anxiety, less scrambled thoughts that are sticking to me. There's a more clear path forward as to what's important in the day. I've opted for a vegetarian diet, which has certainly changed my physical makeup to some degree. Which is something that if you asked me 10 to 15 years ago, if I could do that or wanted to do that, I would have brushed you off. I was, I love food, but yoga teaches ahimsa, which is nonviolence. And I just decided that that's something that I could do. I could live without killing an animal in order to survive. And it turns out you can live, and you can live quite well. And it's also easier these days on your pocketbook. But, I have a broader understanding in terms of my soul. I understand through consistent practice, that's where the fruit comes from, right? The fruit of your labor comes through that consistency. And so I don't shy away from that, but I would say I'm more playful. You're more kid-like, you're more childlike. You see people of all ages around you that are doing inspiring things and doing headstands and handstands and tumbling and rolling over, and it's beautiful, and I love it. So I think it's important to never stop playing, to never lose your inner kid, and yoga, teaches you to go in. It teaches you to find that inner self. So the more you look inward, I think the happier you might be in the end.
Absolutely. So beautiful. So beautiful. And we recently had a catch up, and you told me that you had a shoulder injury. So do you have a brain injury? Can you imagine?
Brain injury.
we wouldn't be talking. We wouldn't be talking.
Yeah.
Shoulder injury. Do you feel like all of these healthy habits that you've put in place for all of these years are helping you right now?
Definitely, yeah. It's funny. Most people, they know how much yoga I do, and they just assume it's a yoga injury. Everybody wants to discount it quickly, but no, it was not a yoga injury. For those that are listening, I fell hiking with a friend, and I tore my bicep, my subscapula, and my labrum. So that was in June, and I've been rehabbing, or I was rehabbing since then until about October, when I didn't know about the bicep tear actually, but so I was doing quite a bit of rehab and recovery. And then when I prepped for surgery, I found out about that, and it's been a longer recovery than I expected because of that. It was basically two different surgeries with the bicep insertion and the rotator cuff. I'll say the physiotherapist that I saw pre-surgery had advised me that the work that I did would have helped me post-surgery in terms of the consistency of what I was doing in physical therapy and rehab, and also with my practice. And then when I did have surgery, and now in my recovery, I had to use what I know almost immediately. I left the hospital with one pain pill, which was fine. It helped put me to sleep a little bit that day. But the next day I had Tylenol pain pills, but I didn't have anything stronger than that. And the next day I had to immediately start using breath work for the pain in that management sense. And by day 3, I had established a routine with my lower body that I could do until I was out of a sling, which was 6 weeks long. So I never stopped allocating that kind of 2-hour window in the morning to exercise. And when I was first, my first week, an hour of that, or, more than 50% of that would have been breath work and meditation for pain management, and also just, I think, body regulation. And then, as soon as I could start to do more, I would incorporate more movements, and then a little bit less of what I started with. But you work back to that overall balance of being functional and incorporating a little bit of everything. But I'm a big proponent of always doing what you can. So even though I didn't have an arm, I could work on my hips, I could work on my breathing, I can work on my other arm, and I can come out of this feeling productive, not only with the shoulder that I fixed, but with other parts of my body. I think my biggest nightmare would have been not doing anything and, coming out of with a healthy shoulder potentially, and then not being able to move, and then having to, rehab that to some degree, and then, get back to normal. It's much easier to take care of things along the way, and keep that road nice and smooth. As I mentioned, we've chatted, and I said I was a little bit behind in my recovery. It's an injury that everybody's very sensitive when you're rehabbing, just to risk the bicep tearing out of the bone and re-tearing the rotator cuff. So the first 12 weeks, I was pretty immobile. And then now that I've been allowed to use some of that function, I'm only going to rehab maybe 2 or 3 times a week, but I'm doing it 7 days a week. And every time they see me, it's a remarkable step forward. And for me, that's kind of all I need mentally, is just to be able to progress forward a little bit each day.
Absolutely. And then it's really beautiful what you said. If you can't move your shoulder, then move your hips, move your leg, do something, move your legs. I think it shows that when we want to do something, we're going to find a way to do it. If we're really committed to something, in this case, your recovery, feeling good in your body, we're going to find a way to do it. And if we want to find excuses, we will always find 1,000 excuses. So it's about, again, finding that one thing that you want to commit to, and then just sticking to that thing, even when it's hard, even when there's, in this case, an injury, and you can still, go back and pull from your healthy habits. Okay, what do I know from meditation? What do I know from breath work? What do I know from yoga? What do I know from sports? And then bring all of those tools and resources that we have in order to continue to grow, to get better, whatever that means on a certain stage in life.
Absolutely.
I know in my case, and I really relate to this, I have a very steady meditation practice every morning for at least, I've lost count now, but maybe 7 or 8 years. And I
Amazing.
lost my father like a year and a half ago. And I was so happy, that was very hard, but I was happy to have those resources, those habits in place to come with me when things are easy and also when things are hard. To have those things in place, I knew how to feel my emotions, I knew how to regulate my emotions, and this was a huge wave of all kinds of emotions, but I felt better equipped than a version of me who didn't have these healthy habits of meditation in place. And I was really happy to bring that habit and navigate things with a lot more ease, a lot more compassion. So I think these habits, like, doing sports, meditation, yoga, everything that we've touched on, it really sets you up for success, to feel better now on a daily basis, but also in the long term when things get a little bit bumpy along the ride and you need a little bit more support. These things come on handy, but it takes years, decades to really develop them the way you've done, the way I've done with meditation.
I think we'd both realize that it's also something that you never stop developing, right? We understand that this is something that it doesn't go away. It's not, this mind chatter, this chittavriti, which is referred to in the yoga practice, is something that doesn't stop. So you always have to put in the work. The work is never done. You've never done enough breath work, enough yoga, enough anything for yourself. It's really an ongoing process. And I think that's the beauty of life. It will adjust with you, and life will move around you. But if you can stay true to yourself and regulate your system to some degree, I think you can have that smoother road that we're all looking for.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us, for sharing your experience, your example in terms of discipline. So where can listeners find you online if they want to know more about Ashtanga or just ask you questions in general about the topics that we've covered today?
I wouldn't say I have a prominent online presence, but I'm open to anybody who ever wants to chat with me and get to know me and, go for a run or do some yoga or anything like that. You can find me on Instagram. My handle is mklev, so MKLEV, or my name is Mark Klevinas, and you can find me on LinkedIn. But yeah, always happy to share what I know if it can be helpful in any way. I am not actively teaching at the moment. It's something I will certainly look to get into later this year. Right now, I just take the opportunity with friends and colleagues sometimes when there is an opportunity to do that. But that's certainly something that I see in my long term with my background of coaching. And I always said I'd be happiest as a teacher. I just didn't know that might be a yoga teacher someday.
Life can throw some surprises in there. So we're going to have all those links in the show notes in case people want to ask you some questions. And I always like to finish the episodes with 3 rapid fire questions. Very intuitive. The first thing that comes to mind, to your heart, will be the right one. So when was the last time you felt bliss?
Probably 2 days ago. I got into upward dog it wasn't the first time, but I got into upward dog for the first time, where it felt very comfortable and my chest opened and I just smiled, and it's the first time in a long time where I've been able to do that and hold my own weight with my shoulder. So I would say that was pure joy. And I think if I'm lucky enough to continue to progress forward, I'll have a lot of smiling and probably happy tears along the way.
Amazing. So happy for you. Can you think of one idea that fundamentally changed your life?
That's a good question. I mean, no idea is a new idea, but I think it's just the idea that you can get better. You can get a little bit better every day if you put the time in. And it doesn't have to be 2 hours a day. It can start with 2 minutes a day. But progress is progress. And I think the idea of one foot in front of the other and starting something is really impactful.
Absolutely. And if you could choose one rule that everybody in the world needs to obey, what would it be?
I don't like these blanket rules because I don't believe that there is one thing that everybody should do. But
You could also say there's no rules.
Say there are no rules, but in general, learn how to breathe through your nose. No, listen more than you speak and practice what you preach, I would say.
That would be a good world. That would be a very good world. Thank you so much, Mark, for your wisdom, for coming onto the show, for your time. It's been a true pleasure to learn from you. I'm sure the listeners are going to love this conversation. We have so much to go and put in practice, to listen to this episode and just go into our lives and put things in practice. So thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
I will see my listeners in the next episode. And in the meantime, in Blisstopia we trust.